Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something, well, potentially monumental. It's President Trump's 20-point Gaza peace plan.
Yeah, it's definitely making waves. We're talking about a plan designed to end a really brutal two-year war.
Exactly. And it's not just a simple stop shooting agreement, it's this huge multi-stage roadmap. Think of massive opportunities, but also, massive risks.
That's right. So our mission today is to really dig into it. We're using reports from places like the Council on Foreign Relations, Chatham House Analysis, AP News feeds, the usual sources. We want to break down what's actually in these 20 points, what got agreed in this first ceasefire phase, what's maybe missing, and frankly, why so many experts are looking at the later stages and feeling pretty skeptical.
And we're using the Feynman technique today. So the idea is if we hit something dense like the Board of Peace or this international stabilization force, we're going to break it down. Simple terms.
Why make it make sense?
We'll call out the gaps, where the info gets fuzzy or where there's clear disagreement. And we'll use analogies to try and make this whole geopolitical thing feel a bit more, well, understandable.
It's a good approach.
Yeah.
Because you can think of the plan like building a bridge, maybe.
Yeah.
Phase one, the part that's done, that was like putting up the temporary scaffolding.
Yeah.
The ceasefire, the hostage swap.
Okay, the urgent stuff.
Your urgent stuff, exactly. But phases 2 and 3, that's where you actually build the bridge itself, the foundations, the supports. That means dealing with demilitarization, setting up governance with Palestinian technocrats, crucially apolitical ones.
Right.
Then there's the massive reconstruction, and finally trying to define some kind of political future, a political horizon.
But the catch is?
The catch, yeah, is that the main players who need to use this bridge, they seem to have fundamentally different ideas about where it should actually lead in the end.
Okay, so let's set the stage. How did we get to this 20-point plan? The war itself kicked off October 7th, 2023. Devastating stuff.
Right. And there were attempts before this. 2 big ceasefires were floated November 2023, then again March 2025. Both fell apart.
So this plan, announced September 29th, 2025, it felt different. It wasn't just another pause button.
That was the intention, definitely. The sources frame it as much more foundational. The stated goal, the big objective, is to turn Gaza into a, quote, de-radicalized terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors.
That's a tall order?
A very tall order. And to get there, the plan lays out these 20 specific points. They really focus on 3 big areas: security, governance, and economic recovery.
Okay, 20 points is a lot to track. We've kind of grouped them into 4 main pillars, right, to make it easier to grasp. Let's start with the first one, security and withdrawal.
Makes sense. That covers points 1, 3, and 16 in the actual document. Point 1 is simple. Immediate, total end to the war. Freeze the battle lines exactly where they are.
Stop shooting.
Stop shooting. Then, point 3 gets into withdrawal. Israel agrees this is key not to occupy or annex Gaza, not even partially. But, and it's a big but, the IDF withdraws in 3 stages. Okay? And while they're withdrawing, point 16 says they maintain a significant security perimeter presence. Think of it like a buffer zone, which they'll hold until the international community says Gaza is, secure from any resurgent terror threat.
So withdrawal, but with strings attached, what's pillar 2?
Pillar 2 is humanitarian and exchange. That's points 4, 5, 7, and 8. This was about the immediate crisis. Point 7 demanded a huge surge in aid, food, fuel, medicine, getting water and power back online.
The basics for survival.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And points 4, 5, and 8 laid out the framework for the exchange, the remaining Israeli hostages, for a large specified number of Palestinian prisoners. That was the really visible part of phase 1.
Got it. Now, the really tricky part, I imagine, is pillar 3, demilitarization and governance.
Yeah, this is where it gets complex.
Yeah.
Point 6, 9, 13, and 15. Point 13 demands the full dissolution of Hamas, in both militarily and as the civil authority running Gaza. Tunnels, weapons factories, stockpiles, all got to go.
Who oversees that?
It's point 6. An international stabilization force, the ISF, deploys to manage the security vacuum. And point 9 sets up the new governance, a committee of Palestinian technocrats, experts basically, not politicians.
And who supervises them?
That's also point 9, a new international body called the Board of Peace.
Okay, we'll come back to that board. What's the final pillar?
The final pillar is the long game, economic and political future. Points 10, 19, and 20. This is the incentive, the carrot. Point 10 talks about massive redevelopment. The World Bank's figure is over $50 billion needed for reconstruction alone.
Wow.
Huge numbers. It also mentions creating a special economic zone, hoping to attract investment. And then Point 19 and 20 talk about a dialogue process to agree on a political horizon.
A political horizon, that sounds deliberately vague.
It is extremely vague, and that's where a lot of the skepticism comes in, as we'll see. It promises talks, but guarantees absolutely nothing concrete on the political outcome.
Okay, let's pause on that Board of Peace you mentioned, point 9. This sounds important. An international body overseeing things.
It's critical. It's basically the International Transitional Authority. President Trump himself is chairing it. The sources also mention other big names involved in setting it up, like former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair.
Quite the heavy hitters.
Indeed. And its job is enormous. It controls the money, the $50 billion plus redevelopment fund from international donors. It sets the framework, coordinates everything, and oversees anti-corruption efforts. They're the temporary trustees, essentially.
Okay, Feynman analogy time. How do we simplify this Board of Peace? It sounds like it's doing finance, construction oversight, political mediation, everything.
That's a good way to put it. Let's try this. Think of Gaza, after the war, as a massive corporation that's gone bankrupt, and its physical assets are devastated. It needs a total overhaul, right?
Right, a complete turnaround.
So the Board of Peace isn't the day-to-day local management. It's more like a temporary, high-level international board of trustees appointed to oversee this bankrupt corporation. Their job is to stabilize it, manage the huge influx of cash to make $50 billion, make sure it's spent properly, and put strict anti-corruption rules in place.
So they hold the purse strings and the strategy?
Exactly. They control the finances and the big picture strategy. And they stay in charge until the actual local management, which the plan says should be a reformed Palestinian Authority, is proven to be stable, capable, and trustworthy enough to handle billions of dollars without things falling apart again or money going missing. It's all about that temporary fiduciary oversight.
Okay, that helps. A board of trustees for a failing company waiting for new management to be ready.
Precisely. So, phase 1. The sources all call this the easy part. Though easy is relative here, obviously. It took intense negotiation.
But it did happen. And quickly, what was the focus?
It was purely about stopping the violence immediately and swapping assets. Israel pulling back some troops in exchange for hostages and prisoners. Tangible stuff.
Right. The timeline was tight, wasn't it? Israel's cabinet approved it late October 9th, 2025.
And it kicked in just hours later, October 10th. All military actions, airstrikes, artillery, ground assaults stopped. The front lines froze exactly where they were.
And the IDF withdrawal, you said it was staged.
Immediately after the ceasefire started, yeah. The IDF began pulling back to an agreed line. Now, the numbers here are important. This first stage still leaves Israeli forces controlling about 53% of Gaza's territory.
Still more than half.
Still more than half, including critical border areas and buffer zones Israel wants for security, but the plan outlines 2 more withdrawal stages later on. Stage 2 reduces control to around 40%, and the final stage leaves them with about 15%. That's the long-term security perimeter.
And these later stages depend on?
They're explicitly conditioned on how well the demilitarization efforts go in Phase 2. If Hamas doesn't disarm, the IDF doesn't fully withdraw.
Got it. And the human impact of this first withdrawal was immediate, right? We saw pictures.
Yeah, satellite imagery showed it clearly. Palestinians who'd fled south started heading back north almost instantly towards places like Gaza City, mainly using Al-Rashid Street.
Back to rubble in many cases.
Tragically, yes. Just sheer devastation. It really highlighted the desperation for people to get back to whatever was left of their homes.
And the centerpiece, politically and emotionally, was the exchange.
Absolutely. Hamas agreed to release the 20 remaining known living Israeli hostages. This wasn't immediate. It was tied to a 72-hour window after the IDF completed that first withdrawal stage. So starting Monday morning, October 13th.
And the price Israel paid, it was steep.
Very steep. In return for those 20 hostages, Israel agreed to release 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. And you really have to grasp the significance of that number.
Break it down.
It included 250 prisoners serving life sentences for security offenses. That's a major political concession inside Israel. The other 1,700 were people detained since the war started on October 7th, 2023.
And there was even a clause about the deceased.
Yes, grim but necessary. For every body of a deceased Israeli hostage returned by Hamas, Israel committed to releasing the remains of 15 deceased Gazans held by Israel. It just shows the level of detail, the painful symmetry needed to get agreement even on humanitarian gestures.
Alongside the exchange, aid was critical.
Yeah.
Point 7,
Yeah.
right? Addressing famine conditions.
Urgent priority. The plan mandated an immediate, verifiable increase. Egypt reported sending 400 trucks across on Sunday, October 12th.
Just 2 days after the ceasefire.
Right. With the goal of quickly ramping that up to 600 trucks daily. Food, shelter, medicine, fuel. The Rafah crossing with Egypt was the main artery, fully open for aid.
The monitor.
Monitored, yes. The agreement allows a small Israeli military presence there specifically to check cargo and prevent weapons smuggling.
Okay, now you mentioned something interesting about the aid distribution structure itself, a knowledge gap.
Yes, this is fascinating and maybe quite important. Before this peace plan back in May, an entity called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, was set up.
GHF.
Okay. It was backed by Israel and the U.S. Its whole purpose was to be an alternative to the UN aid agencies, specifically UNRWA, and to make sure aid didn't get diverted by Hamas. It was Israel and America's preferred channel.
So you'd think it would be central to this new aid surge.
You would think. But eyewitness reports from Palestinians, picked up by news outlets, said that almost immediately after the ceasefire deal was announced, GHF distribution sites in Rafah and central Gaza were just dismantled.
Dismantle how?
Physically taken apart. Distribution stopped cold for several days. This organization, built up as the non-UN alternative, basically vanished overnight the moment the peace plan took effect.
Why? That seems counterintuitive.
Exactly. It's huge knowledge capital.
Yeah.
Why dissolve this U.S. and Israeli-backed food contractor right when you need massive aid distribution? It suggests there might have been some other political deal or logistical requirement buried within Phase 1 that isn't spelled out in the 20 points. What happened to the GHF and why it disappeared so fast, that's something needing investigation.
Interesting. Okay, so Phase 1 gets done, hostages exchanged, aid flowing. What about the diplomacy?
Big momentum push. President Trump scheduled immediate travel to the region right after the exchange was completed. Meetings planned with hostage families in Israel, and then co-chairing a big peace summit in Egypt with President el-Sisi.
High-level engagement.
Very high level. The sources suggest this sustained personal involvement by Trump was probably the key factor in getting Phase 1 over the line, especially after the 2 previous failures. It needed that top-level push.
All right, so Phase 1 is done. The scaffolding is up. The guns are silent for now. But now we move into Phase 2. This is the actual construction phase, isn't it? Building the real security and governance.
Exactly. And this is where those nice, simple points in the plan start crashing into some very hard, very old realities.
First big hurdle, demilitarization. Point 13. Sounds simple. Get rid of Hamas's military stuff. Tunnels, rockets, the lot. Overseen by international monitors.
Sounds simple on paper. In reality, it's probably the single biggest sticking point.
Okay, let's use Feynman here. Simplify the Hamas position. They agreed to the ceasefire, the exchange, but not disarmament. Why is that their absolute red line?
Their position, and they've been very consistent on this, is basically no permanent disarmament without Palestinian statehood. Full stop.
So the guns are leverage.
Precisely. For Hamas, their weapons aren't just military tools, they're political leverage. It's the only real card they feel they have in negotiations for their ultimate political goal, which is statehood. Giving them up before getting statehood recognized is, from their perspective, just unilateral surrender.
So the plan's offer of amnesty or safe passage for fighters who disarm, that doesn't cut it.
It doesn't address the core political calculation. It tries to bypass it by appealing to individuals, but the leadership's strategic position remains unchanged. This creates a fundamental clash right at the start of Phase 2, likely irreconcilable, many experts think.
Okay, the plan must anticipate this friction, though. That's where the International Stabilization Force, the ISF, comes in, right? To prevent chaos as the IDF pulls back further.
Yes. Point 6 mandates the ISF deploy immediately to fill that potential security vacuum. It's meant to be multinational U.S., key Arab partners, other internationals. The U.S. already committed 200 monitors to Israel, showing some initial skin in the game.
What's their actual job description? It sounds complicated.
It is. The ISF has basically 4 big tasks, all happening at once. 1, secure Gaza's borders to stop smuggling. 2, prevent any new weapons from getting in. 3, train and support a new, vetted Palestinian police force local security. And 4, gradually take over security responsibility in areas the IDF vacates during its later withdrawal stages.
That sounds like nation building meets peacekeeping meets border control. We've seen stabilization forces struggle with less complex mandates.
And that's exactly the warning flag raised by analysts, particularly at Chatham House. They draw a direct comparison, or rather a warning, based on the Coalition Provisional Authority, the CPA, in Iraq after 2003.
What's a specific worry?
The worry is about dissolving existing structures too quickly. The 20-point plan calls for dissolving Hamas not just militarily, but also as the civil authority, replacing them overnight with technocrats. In Iraq, dismantling the Ba'ath Party and the army created a massive power vacuum and chaos. The fear here is that if you just fire all the local civil servants in Gaza, the people running hospitals, schools, utilities, many of whom might have had some nominal link to Hamas just to keep their jobs in coast, you risk a total collapse of basic services and public order.
Making the ISF's job impossible.
Exactly. The ISF can't function if the basic fabric of civilian life shreds. They risk being seen not as stabilizers, but as propping up a system that doesn't work, repeating the mistakes of Iraq.
Which leads straight into the governance problem. Point 9. This technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee. The idea is competence, not politics. But is that realistic?
That's what experts are calling the potential fatal flaw of imposition. Chatham House is really clear on this. If you impose a governing body from the outside without deep, genuine buy-in from the local population, you delegitimize it from day one.
Like we saw in Kosovo or East Timor.
Similar dynamics, yes. If Gazans see this new committee as just an international imposition, maybe even puppets, then the ISF troops supporting them, they stop being seen as protectors and start looking like an international army of occupation.
Especially if the IDF is still operating around the edges in that security perimeter.
Precisely. If the IDF is still present and conducting security operations, even targeted ones, the ISF automatically gets linked to that. They look like collaborators in what locals might see as continued repression, no matter how much good work they do on reconstruction or policing. That initial lack of democratic legitimacy is a huge vulnerability.
And even Hamas, who agreed to Phase 1, they put a condition on this technocratic government, didn't they?
A crucial caveat. While accepting the concept of a technocratic government, Hamas insisted it must be based on Palestinian national consensus. Meaning, even if they formally dissolve their military wing, which is a big if, they clearly intend to maintain political influence, perhaps indirectly. They want a government that has broad Palestinian support, which likely means one they have some say in, or at least doesn't actively oppose their long-term goals.
So if this technocratic body tries to rule without that consensus,
then Phase 2 likely stalls. You can't move effectively into Phase 3, the massive reconstruction, if the governing body lacks the local legitimacy to manage security, the economy, and basic services. That lack of political buy-in could undermine the entire stabilization effort the ISF is supposed to provide. Okay, so if Phase 2 is about navigating immediate operational minefields, Phase 3 is where the plan confronts the huge existential political roadblocks that have plagued this conflict for decades. The whole 20-point structure really depends on solving 4 massive issues.
roadblock number 1 sounds like it's about the money. Reconstruction versus reality. Point 10 calls for that $50 billion rebuilding effort, a special economic zone, talk of exciting development ideas.
The scale is just immense for such a small, devastated area.
Yeah.
$50 billion. I mean, that's comparable to major post-war reconstruction efforts elsewhere, but focused on this tiny strip of land. The question isn't just where does the money come from, but how on earth do you spend it effectively without it getting lost or causing more problems?
And this is where the strong criticism comes in. I remember reading Josh Paul calling the vision of Gaza as the Riviera of the Middle East a moral atrocity. Why such harsh language? Why neocolonialism?
The neocolonialism critique really focuses on the governance of the reconstruction, specifically the power of that board of peace we talked about.
The international trustees.
Exactly. When you have an external body, chaired by the U.S. president, controlling $50 billion and setting all the priorities for rebuilding a shattered society, well, critics argue the local population loses control over its own future. Agency is lost.
So the rebuilding served outside interests.
That's the fear, that the reconstruction becomes less about what Palestinians need and want for their own political and economic future, and more about serving the interests of the international donors, neighboring states like Egypt, or even corporations looking to profit. And tied into that is the massive risk of corruption.
Right. $50 billion is a magnet for corruption.
Absolutely. As analysts point out, billions will be spent and billions will be made unless there are incredibly robust, transparent, and enforced anti-corruption mechanisms. There's a huge danger that local elites or external actors could capture large chunks of that aid money.
Which brings us to another knowledge gap. We've seen aid corruption derail recovery in places like Haiti, right? What specific anti-corruption measures does this U.S.-chaired Board of Peace actually plan to implement? The sources mention oversight, but the details seem thin. Who audits this $50 billion? That seems critical.
It's absolutely critical. And yes, details are scarce in the public documents so far. Okay, roadblock number 2, the Palestinian Authority and reunification. The plan's endgame, politically, is to hand control of Gaza back to a reformed PA, linking it back up with the West Bank.
But that's politically toxic right now, isn't it? Netanyahu's government has flat out rejected any role for the current PA. They often equate the PA with Hamas.
That rejection is complex. On one level, it's presented as a security issue. Israel demands the PA undergo huge reforms, security reforms, anti-corruption, maybe even electoral changes before it could be trusted with Gaza. They want a PA that can police itself effectively and poses no threat. That's the reformed PA definition.
But there's another layer.
There's a political layer, yes. Critics argue that keeping Gaza politically separate from the West Bank has been a long-term Israeli strategy to prevent the emergence of a unified, viable Palestinian state. Rejecting the PA helps maintain that separation.
Let's use that house analogy again. It seemed useful before.
Okay, yeah, so the Palestinian political system is like a house split in two. Gaza is one half, the West Bank is the other. Israel is saying the PA, which runs the West Bank half, needs a complete renovation, new plumbing, new wiring, security systems guaranteed before they're allowed to manage the Gaza half.
Makes sense so far.
But at the same time, the current Israeli leadership is saying they fundamentally oppose the idea of ever letting these two halves of the house actually join together to become one single unified house, i.e. a Palestinian state.
So the condition for taking over Gaza reform is tied to rejecting the ultimate goal, reunification and statehood.
Exactly. It's a political catch-22. Reform is demanded, but the political outcome that reform is supposed to enable a unified Palestinian entity is simultaneously rejected.
Which leads us perfectly to roadblock number 3, Palestinian statehood itself. Point 19 acknowledges the aspiration but offers only vague dialogue for a political horizon, no commitments.
And that vagueness was immediately seized upon. Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly stated that this political horizon language does not really offer any commitment to a substantive settlement. He explicitly rejected establishing a Palestinian state as part of this deal.
And Israeli public opinion backs him up on this.
Polling data cited in the sources shows a clear majority of Israelis currently oppose a two-state solution, largely due to security fears heightened since October 7th. So the plan lacks the single biggest political prize that might incentivize Palestinians and Arab partners to fully commit to the difficult parts, like disarmament.
And without that political horizon, the security structure itself is shaky. Roadblock 4, ISF commitment.
It creates a massive legitimacy problem for the International Stabilization Force. The Arab nations think Egypt, Jordan, maybe Gulf states whose troops and regional buy-in are absolutely vital for the ISF to work.
They have conditions.
They have clear conditions, yes. Full Israeli withdrawal beyond even the final 15% perimeter, and crucially, a clear, credible political path towards Palestinian statehood. If Israel explicitly rejects statehood under this plan, why would Arab countries send their soldiers into Gaza to enforce a peace that doesn't lead anywhere politically acceptable to them or the Palestinians?
Especially when Hamas itself rejects the ISF entirely.
Precisely. So you have Israeli rejection of statehood undermining Arab participation and Hamas rejecting the force altogether. The whole ISF concept, central to Phase 2 stability, looks incredibly fragile due to these political rejections.
So the big takeaway seems to be Phase 1 succeeded on logistics and immediate needs, but the plan's future depends on solving political problems that seem, well, currently unsolvable.
That's the overwhelming consensus from the expert analysis we reviewed. Unless this plan somehow evolves to offer a genuine, credible path towards a comprehensive political settlement, one that addresses Palestinian self-determination, the temporary ceasefire achieved in Phase 1 is unlikely to translate into lasting stability. The whole thing risks being seen as just another form of managed occupation, and that perception could doom it. #tagoutro.
Okay, so after digging through all this, what does this incredibly detailed 20-point plan mean for you listening right now and trying to track this? We've seen it succeed where others failed. It got a ceasefire, a major prisoner exchange, started aid flowing, and set up a huge financial plan for rebuilding. Phase 1 happened.
It did. But as we've unpacked, Phases 2 and 3, the long-term parts, they demand fundamental shifts from both sides.
Okay.
Historic concessions, really. Hamas giving up its weapons completely, and Israel accepting a pathway to a unified Palestinian state.
Concessions they've consistently refused to make.
Exactly. So the plan seems built on some extremely optimistic assumptions about their willingness to change course. Maybe even unrealistic assumptions, given the track record.
Yeah.
Without those core shifts, the whole 20-point structure feels like it's built on shaky ground.
So its success moving forward seems to rely heavily on President Trump. On his ability to keep pushing, applying pressure when things inevitably get stuck.
That seems to be the implication. His role shifts now from negotiator to enforcer, trying to maintain momentum and enforce compliance with the really difficult parts, demilitarization, governance reform, from parties who may be fundamentally opposed to the plan's deeper goals. It requires sustained high-level American pressure.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe a provocative one, based on the sources. The guns are quiet for now, which is huge. But true, lasting peace here seems to depend less on the 20 points that were agreed.
And more on the two core demands that were explicitly rejected by the key players: Hamas fully disarming, and Israel accepting a credible path to Palestinian statehood. If those remain non-starters, it's hard to see how this plan achieves long-term stability despite the initial success of Phase 1.
Definitely something to keep watching. And that leaves us, and you, with some deep knowledge gaps to think about, or even research further as this situation develops.
Yeah, three big ones stood out from our reading. First, what exactly does a reformed Palestinian Authority look like in practice? The plan demands reform before the PA can govern Gaza, but what are the specific measurable benchmarks on security, on corruption, on elections that the U.S. and Israel would need to see met? Right now, reform is a vague political goal, not an operational checklist.
Good question.
Second, that $50 billion Reconstruction Fund and the talk of exciting development ideas. Given the valid criticisms about potential neocolonialism and the huge risk of corruption, what are the specifics of these investment plans? Which countries or corporations are actually putting up the money? And crucially, what concrete anti-corruption safeguards are being built into the Board of Peace structure to prevent waste and capture? We need more than just promises of oversight.
Right, show us the mechanisms. And the final gap.
The final one loops back to the ISF and politics. How will the U.S.-chaired Board of Peace actually bridge the gap with key Arab nations needed for the ISF? These nations demand a political horizon leading to statehood, which Israel rejects. How do you get Arab troops deployed under those contradictory conditions, especially when they might feel it undermines Palestinian aspirations or makes them look like enforcers of an unpopular status quo? That coordination challenge looks immense and could unravel the whole security plan.